Everybody, thanks for watching. And just a quick reminder that Stock Market Volume 2 is not available, as well as DEFCON Delta. Make sure you guys check these videos out. We'll get into DEFCON Delta a little bit at the end of this video. I want to talk about stuff that's been happening lately with, whole Corona thing. But, everybody who's waiting for anything, tracking numbers have been sent out. Make sure you check your spam, check your email. Anybody else who's waiting for a tracking number, you will get it soon. The people who got the free audiobook, you will get that link soon. That link will be coming. We just taking care of the new site and getting stuff up on a new site. So as well as in a new download site, Podia. So thanks to everybody who used Podia. Hopefully all you guys who purchased through Podia signed up. Remember, if you purchase through Podia, when you finish, they'll give you an option to set up a login and password. Do that. So then that way all your videos are saved there that you bought, and you can just go back and download them, if you need it. So eventually we're going to integrate Podia into the site and just be using Podia. But if you have trouble with Podia, you can still use payloads to get digital downloads as well. If you're waiting for a link, email me. You should have got it by now. Check your email, check your spam. But thanks to everybody who's grabbing these videos. As I said, you want to see this stuff. Now, to get into this video, because we're going to segue a little bit into this whole critical race theory thing, and people got to understand what this is about and how they're going to use it and how they've been using it. So first thing, like I said, I always talk about forums and stuff that I'm in. People always send me stuff to talk about. And in my book, I talked about the whole thing with Anthony Johnson. And a lot of you guys already know the story. A lot of you guys understand what this is about, but there is so many people who do not know. And there's also a lot of Black folks who have wrong information about it and have no information about it. But it's deeper than just what's, the facts of that case, because when you start digging into it, you realize a lot of things about Christianity. You realize a lot of things about what was going on around that time when you start really digging. It's one of the reasons why I tell people to look into the slave narratives and the Library of Congress and understand what those slaves talked about and the information they passed down to each other through slavery, because when you're in a situation like that, knowledge is important. So what those slaves wrote in the slave narratives, it is important information to know if you want to be in a real understanding of this, situation and what was really going on. So I want to read to you just a post from a woman on this whole thing and just get you to understand the views of a lot of white folks with this whole slavery thing, which is completely absurd. So it says here, this woman, Carol, Blacks have perpetrated and promoted slavery upon their own for generations. Here is an interesting tidbit that was just learned. By the way, Muslims and Blacks were the ones responsible for bringing Black slaves to America to sell to others. This was after they had shipped to Haiti and other islands. America was an afterthought. When the slaves were freed after the Civil War, many chose to stay with their white owners and work in a different capacity because they were loved and treated like family there. Think about what I just read. Now it goes on to say down here, the first slave owner in America was not only a black man. He went to court and demanded it. In 1654, note that date in your head. In 1654, it was time for Anthony to release John Castor, a Black indentured servant. Instead, Anthony told Castor he was extending his time. Castor left and became employed by the free white man, Robert Parker. Anthony Johnson sued Robert Parker in the Northampton court in 1654. In 1655, the court ruled that Anthony Johnson could hold John Castor indefinitely. The court gave judicial sanction for Blacks to own a slave of their own race. Thus, Castor became the first permanent slave and Johnson the first slave owner. Now, believe it or not, we was talking about this for a long time, and believe it or not, this is, part of critical race theory. And you got to understand why I'm saying that, because critical race theory is aiming to change history. And we're going to get into this in a second, but you have to understand one. First of all, what's a slave? A slave is a person you hold against their will and you force them to do work or what have you. That's a slave. So one of the things that you will find if this woman would have did her research, she would find that one, Anthony Johnson himself was a slave. Now, there's different stories about this dude. And one of the stories is his name was Antonio, and he changed his name later to Anthony Johnson. And then it says that it was the Portuguese slavers that gave him the name Antonio. And we don't know what he was calling himself back in Angola. So one story you will read, which was in the original Wikipedia entry on this. So I showed you guys before. I talked about this. Wikipedia can be edited. And if you're a person who goes to Wikipedia and use it a lot, and sometimes you go back and reference things, you'll notice it, especially things that's huge like this. So years ago, in studying this whole thing, it was completely different than what it is now. Not completely different. They changed a few things. One of the things they changed was the story on Anthony Johnson. It originally read about what happened to him over in Angola, that he was captured by the Arab slave trade and was later sold as an indentured servant to a company in Virginia. Okay, that's what it said before. Now it's changing that and saying that, oh no, him and what other Africans did was they used to catch passage over from Africa to America, and to work off the room and board on the ship, they would have to work as indentured servants. Now understand, even if that was true, it was saying that he was captured in 1620. Now slavery was already going on. What African didn't understand that Europeans was capturing Africans and taking them to America to be slaves? Now they're trying to change it and say that no, Africans were coming over to work in America in exchange for room and board, for the ship ride, and to be, have a place to stay and food or what have you. They became indentured servants under a contract, and they had to work off their debt. And then after their debt was paid, they could go about and be free in America, which is completely changing the history that we know and was taught about us being captured and brought over and working as slaves. Understand? So even if it's true, it don't make sense. So what the woman is saying and not realizing is, taking a person and making them a slave. Okay. What about the person itself? Now, one black person who enslaves another doesn't speak for the entire race of black people and makes it, some type of huge crime on our race that we are all responsible for slavery because of few black people enslaved others or sold others into slavery. That's one thing. Now, another claim on this whole thing is he was the first person to own a slave in America. You got to remember, he didn't make that man a slave. The court system did. It was the court that ruled that this man was enslaved to him for life. He didn't rule that. Now, the story is shady, Anyway, what type of person, one, if you were supposed to be set free at a certain time or date, why would you wait 7 years after that date to say something? So when you get into the story, supposedly, John Castor was upset that he wasn't set free, and he went to his neighbor, Robert Parker, who he supposedly had a better relationship with, and told the story. And Robert Parker said, no, you're free. You know what? You're going to sign a contract with me to where you're going to work for me as an indentured, servant. And that's what happened. So then Anthony Johnson, took him to court, Robert Parker to court to get back, his indentured servant, who I guess he felt like owed him more time. Now, one, what he would have to have proven in court was he did owe him more time. Now, remember, originally, the court ruled for Robert Parker and said that, he can go ahead and work for him. Then that next year that they appealed the case, and then Anthony Johnson won. And then not only did they appeal the case, they somehow granted, Anthony Johnson ownership of, John Castor for life. So it wasn't that Anthony Johnson, if the story is true, which we'll get into this in a second, it wasn't that Anthony Johnson somehow went out and captured this man and everything and, made him a slave for life. And he supposedly went to court because he felt like this dude owed him more time, or he didn't get the quality of work out of him he was supposed to. So he went to court to get him back. And the court ruled that he had to work for him for life. So it's not that, he somehow is the fucking overlord of all of fucking African slavery, this dude, and he just somehow, controls the entire system. And it's because of this one guy that Africans were slaves. This is the way they try to make it and justify as we enslaved ourselves, as she mentions. Now, the whole thing with the Arab slave trade, we already know about. But what a lot of people don't understand is, and this is why the Pope, he apologized because of their role they had in the slave trade. Because one, remember, the Roman Empire was getting slaves from the Arabs. Rome had a large role in our enslavement, and they was using the Arabs to enslave us. So this is one of the reasons why they apologized for their role that they had in the whole slave trade. So again, we understand one, and as I mentioned this before, you can sit there and say that, Africans indeed sold other Africans into slavery. And I got into that whole thing with about Bantu, and understand that it wasn't everybody. It wasn't widespread. There were some who sold their enemies into slavery, and there were others who fought. If you do the research on this whole thing, you'll read about the Ashanti. You'll read about Bado Bantu, who got his head cut off by the Dutch, and they returned his head. And he was a king who basically fought to, save his people because he didn't want to enslave them. So they don't talk about that. They want you to think that we somehow created this entire market for slavery and we just responsible for our own enslavement. And they don't want to look at the fact that, one, if you buy a person, you are just as wrong as the person who was selling them. And it's not even about that, because even if you sold somebody into indentured, servitude, that doesn't give you the right to hang them from trees, to beat religion into them, to set them on fire, to have dogs rip them apart, to impregnate and rape the women, and then feed the babies to alligators. How does an African selling another African justifies you doing all these sick things to African people? It doesn't. So, her argument is stupid, and any person who brings up their argument is crazy for trying to justify, this whole thing. So you have a free person minding their business. I don't care who it is that took them and brought them wherever they bought them. If they were forced to work against their will, they are a slave. They are not, responsible for their own enslavement just because the person who sold them was the same race of color as them. It doesn't justify what happened to them over in this country. And even if you want to, say that, what about after slavery? What about after slavery? All the sick shit that was done to black people, all of the lynchings, all of the murders, the racism, nothing excuses that. So we're supposed to blame ourselves for that as well. And we supposedly had done that to ourselves when it was white folks that done this, to us. So her argument is stupid, and the facts in that whole Anthony Johnson thing is way off. One, they don't even know if the Antonio they have on record is Anthony Johnson. They think he's the most likely person. And remember, if you do the research on this, 1730 is when all information on that family falls off, because after Anthony Johnson died, they took everything from him. And supposedly his family bought some land somewhere and they disappeared. So the information is sketchy on this guy, one. And they can't even really tell you 100% if that's the same guy or anything like that. Now, the picture that's circulating, and you guys seen this picture. This is not even Anthony Johnson. First of all, this man died in 1670. There was no camera yet. Camera wasn't invented until the 19th century. So there was no camera, no footage or photo of this man for them to just put this picture up there. This person right here is Lewis Hayden. Lewis Hayden escaped from slavery in Kentucky, and he basically, moved to Boston and became an abolitionist. The picture of this man, because you can Google it and you can look up Lewis Hayden, this photo will pop up. Same photo that's on this whole thing that this woman is using to say this thing happened. So everything is way off and wrong about, her whole post anyway. But they use it to justify their own guilt and the bullshit racism that they have, and trying to make it like, they somehow are basically, good people in all this, when we know the atrocities and sick shit that was happening during slavery. I don't care what a person sells you. They don't expect you to hang it from a tree. They don't expect you to set it on fire and do all kinds of sick shit. They don't expect you to rape it. They don't expect you to do all the sick stuff that was done to the slaves. So nothing that no person says can justify what happened to these slaves. Now, major part about this is understanding how it plays into this whole thing with critical race theory. So with critical race theory, It's people that want you to look at the legal aspects of racism that exist within our society and how that play a role in where we are today. Fucking common sense. But they're using this. This is a whole setup. Got to pay attention to this. They're using this as a means to delete history. So you guys have been seeing it. You've been hearing about it. So many people have been sending me shit, for months now about how they're getting rid of, all the history about Dr. King, the history about slavery. And that's one of the main things that they're changing. And this is one of the points right here that you'll see. Them saying that Africans came over to America. No, they wasn't slaves. They had to work off their debt as indentured servants. They worked it off. And that's what happened. You have super coons like, Ben Carson come on TV and say, oh, no, these people are just being divisive. And these people are trying to make, young white boys feel guilty about being white and trying to infuriate and anger young black males and make them angry at their country. This is the narrative they're putting out there so they can change the curriculum and say, oh, we don't want to create these angry black children. So we have to change the history books or not even talk about history, which is what they want to do. We can't put this information out there because it's going to make young black boys angry at their country. And it's going to make young white boys feel guilty about being white. So let's not tell the truth, or let's change the truth to something that people can understand and accept. As I told you guys, a long time ago when my son came to me, he didn't believe slavery was real. When they told him in school, imagine that. He didn't think it was he didn't think it was true. He didn't think it was, something that absolutely happened. And he was like, on the fence about it. But I'm like, yeah, this is what happened. This happened to us. So they're trying to use it to change the narrative and change the history books so they can make everything, wishy-washy on their part. And if you watch my series, you watch my videos, you understand why. You understand what this whole thing is about and what's coming with that. So I don't want to get too deep into all that here. But you got to look at this whole thing. And for the people who didn't know this information and didn't understand the truth about Anthony Johnson, stop spreading that shit, because you have black Christians walking around trying to justify, just to justify their Bible and say, see, no, we sold ourselves into slavery. Black people wasn't the only people that were slaves, and it's not a slave. It's a servant or indentured servant, which is stupid. And you can look at the whole thing. And then when you start to look deeper, you'll see, what that was about. Now, when you look into this whole thing, another thing you're going to understand is, one, most of the people who was indentured servants was white folks. We were slaves. You can't go to a country and take people against their will and bring them over here and say, well, we're going to make you an indentured servant. You're going to work for this many years, and then whatever you do after that is on you. You make him, I don't want to do that. I want to go back home. So now you're a slave. What about the people who you threw overboard? What about the people that you killed? Oh, shit, you just hung Jesse from the damn tree. What about him? You just shot this guy. You just beat to death this guy. What about these people? So that's not indentured, servitude. That's slavery. You're a slave. Like, come on. So when you get into the slave narratives, one of the things the slaves talk about is the legal aspect of this. So understand, we're talking about the 1600s, the 17th century. This is not America. So even when you say it's the first person owned a slave in America, it's not even really America yet. It's not the United States. It's not like what we would know it as, America. Of course, it is. It's the country. It's the land. But remember, at this time in the 1600s, those 13 colonies was operating under British law. Just that simple. So English common law held that a child was basically the status of his father. And that was important. Now, that's true if the father is Christian. This is one of the reasons why people were converting to Christianity, so they can be accepted under the English common law, especially if he was considered an English subject, which basically everybody was. So a lot of the free people converted because they wanted that. Because if you took a woman or bought a lot of those free black people in the North, they was getting slaves. And of course, yeah, they was buying them, but they was freeing them, they was marrying them. There's so many stories on this. White guys as well. So not marrying them, but knocking them up. So let's just keep it real. But in the slave narratives, a lot of slaves talk about, the becoming Christian for those reasons and how they told them that it would have some type of benefits for them if they were Christians. And then they met indentured servants free people a lot of times going up to the north with their masters, and they would see free black people, which, in what's it, 12 Years a Slave movie, you seen how that played out in that movie, how he was free and then they got him and boom, next thing you know, he's a slave. But in the story, I talked about this before about George Washington, one of his wife's servants. That's what happened with her. They came up to Pennsylvania. This was Martha Washington's favorite slave. They came up to Pennsylvania and she met some free black people in Philadelphia. And they kicked some knowledge to her and they end up helping her escape to come up, north. And then Martha Washington wanted her back so bad, she sent George Washington up there and they told him straight up, nah, she's free here. She don't want to come back. She don't want to go back there. And there's nothing he could do about it because of the legal situation. She actually tried to buy her back or pay for her, but she couldn't do it. So you got to understand it was a different time back then. And remember, up until, after the Civil War, the 13 colonies didn't have control over the entire country. So slavery was legal in the South, and that was the reason for the Civil War. Because even, 1776, the American Revolution, after it was fought, that was to free themselves from King George III. It wasn't to free the entire country because the 13 colonies didn't have control over the entire country yet. And the South was still free and the South was still the South. And the Civil War is what it took to basically, free the slaves and make that happen. So understand that. But you have to understand how stuff like this whole Anthony Johnson lie can't be really proven true. And it doesn't make sense. It doesn't really fit. The Wikipedia entry for sure was definitely changed because it went from this guy being captured by Arab slave traders to what it says now as, he was just coming to America and he was an indentured servant. He was sold somehow to a Virginia company and he was an indentured servant paying off his room and board or what have you for the trip over. And then when he was free being an indentured servant, he somehow amassed this wealth and everything like that and became a tobacco farmer and all that kind of stuff because the person he was working for supposedly got slaughtered by Indians. Like most of the people that lived there got killed by Indians. He supposedly took over the land. And then what happened between him and Robert Parker happened. And this dude was eventually granted, a lifetime of servitude from this guy. And then when he died, they say, well, it's because he was a black man. He's not really a citizen and he can't own this land. And they took that. But they didn't say that or recognize him as a person who wasn't a part of the country. And he won a legal case over a white man, before that, to get, possession of another man. It's still all suspect. None of it justifies slavery. I don't care who was doing the enslaving or who did what. None of it justifies slavery. And we know for a fact the people who have their hand and is largely way more responsible for it is Europeans. It doesn't matter what anybody said. We had slavery in America. The country was controlled by Europeans, controlled by white people. And again, when we got free, America got free from King George III in England, they didn't immediately set us free. So forget all the stuff that Africans sold Africans into slavery and that we were selling each other and missing that. You got to pay attention to what's getting ready to happen to history. I put a video out a long time ago that said when they changed the history books, all this new, it's not even new, but people are starting to come into the knowledge of what really took place in this country and around the world. And will they change the history books to reflect the truth? And as you can see, no. So critical race theory, which is not a theory, it's a common sense thing. We know for a fact. I put the video on my Instagram of the person talking about what happened with the suburban communities, how these contractors got government contracts to go and build the suburbs away from African Americans, to build the suburbs, and they gave them the money with a stipulation that, hey, don't let black people in these neighborhoods. You can't sell them a house. They can't rent a house. They can't buy a house at all. That was the stipulation. So you got to think about that. And we understand all the stuff that was in place. I mean, we couldn't vote. Come on now, that's enough right there. We couldn't vote. And everything that happened during the Civil Rights Movement and everything that happened since slavery, of course, directly affects our status and position now because this government did not do enough or anything to mend what, even though I don't know if you commend it, but you probably could have had you gave us equal treatment They haven't done anything to mend what happened after slavery and during the civil rights movement and all our leaders being killed. They didn't put out any truth. They didn't, correct the lie that we was, not human. We didn't have souls, that we had rabbit's blood, that we were somehow different and inferior to white folks. They didn't correct any of that. They didn't do nothing to the school system or to the curriculum then when they could have made a difference to let people know that everything was a lie and what happened to us because of them. So nothing was done to fix those problems. So now all of a sudden that, we have a lot of black teachers and white teachers who want to come out and tell the truth, who want to talk about real history and, bring up the fact that, yes, this played a role and it's the reason why we are where we are as people. And as I said, you got people like, Kuhn Ben Carson, who is talking about, we're just trying to be divisive and they're trying to divide the country. And at a time like this is not a time to be trying to divide the country. They're trying to make it like they're trying to very eloquently say we have to protect the children from the truth because the truth is too deep for them. Meanwhile, they don't want to fix any problems that the truth created. And this is where we stand. So I'll get into this in more videos, but just wanted to clear that up real quick. Now, if you've been paying attention, especially if you're on the West Coast, fires everywhere, all over the world, there are fires going on right now. And for the first time ever in my life, I looked at my phone and I seen a forecast for smoke here in Las Vegas. Smoke. You look outside, it's smoky everywhere. And it's like, what's going on? And then you look around the world and you're seeing the same thing. You're seeing these fires all over the place, especially in Turkey. You've seen them now in Italy. You've seen them in a lot of different places. Fires going crazy. Skies filled with smoke. And I'm going to get into this in a later video, but you got to understand what I talked about with chemtrails and what that entails. I want to get into it here, but make sure you guys check out the DEF CON Delta DVD. Watch that. Understand what's happening and what's coming with Corona and how this is going to really affect things and people's health. As you can see, it tells you straight up. It says everyone will experience health issues. Think about that. And we know how dangerous smoke can be and what that entails. But we know with the Corona situation going on, what that can possibly look like if you get sick. So you can use your imagination on how it's going to play out. But I'm going to get into this deeper in a later video. But pay attention to what's going on and know your history. It's one of the reasons why I do these videos and I have so many videos out and why I try to put the right information out, but understand they're coming for it. And I told you guys before, they're coming for the truth. It's going to be gone soon. Videos like this, we're not going to see them. They're going to use this. They're going to pass a law eventually that's going to say straight up, we can't tell the truth. A lot of you guys send me messages about, getting the YouTube plaque. And thank you guys, by the way. I don't want to forget. Thanks to everybody who's been supporting since day one. We made it to 100,000. It took forever. Should be way past 100,000, but people don't like the truth. A lot of people ask me, did I get the silver play button and everything? You got to understand, one, I don't expect YouTube to give me that silver play button. You got to understand, too, that they can, at their own discretion, deny anybody the silver play button. I don't have any strikes on my account, whatever like that. Any issues I had before was resolved. I proved my case, basically. So I don't have no problems, and I should 100%, qualify for the silver play button, which I did inquire about it. And they're supposedly looking into my YouTube account, and they're going to let me know. So I expect a no because of the videos I put out and the controversy. I'll be shocked if I get one. But you got to look at that and see, the truth is not going to be, spoken soon. The whole curriculum is going to change. Our generation will die off. We will be gone, and our children will be raised with the knowledge that they give them. This is how it's been done. This is how they've been covering up the truth for generations. As I said, generational indoctrination. What we know as real history will be gone. And then they will be brought up with whatever is told. And that will stick as the truth. And we don't know how much history, is around that is not real history. That's just bogus, covered up, whitewashed shit. Just gotta understand. Again, the colonists back then, under King George III, and you have England, and you have English common law that had so much influence from Christianity or influenced Christianity, because we're talking about slavery 1600s, and we're talking about the King James Version 1604 to 1611. So everything fits in that time frame. You understand? So we're talking about, the 1620s when this guy comes, 1621, I believe he was born 1600. Anthony Johnson, he comes here 21 years old, and then, these laws are in effect that is reflecting the King James Version of Christianity. So it all fits when you begin to understand. You gotta look at how it played out. But know your history. Don't let these people walk around and make posts like this and say, oh, this justifies slavery somehow, and we enslaved ourselves, and we've been doing this for a long time, and we're not owed anything, and so on and so forth. And common sense to tell you, if you take a person against their will, like if you're walking down the street with, it's you and your squad, and somebody walk up and grab one of your homies, what y'all gonna do? Y'all gonna do something about it. Oh, y'all gonna step in and intervene. Even if you see two guys grab a little girl away from her mom and run down the street, if you're a man, you're gonna chase after that guy, right? You're gonna do the right thing. They didn't do the right thing. So how can you say anything on a moral level, like we're somehow morally wrong on a moral level, when all of this stops if you just don't buy the slave? You just don't buy the person. All of it stops if you don't buy the person. You can end it all if you don't buy the person. You do what's right, what's the right thing to do. But if you're living under a system or a set of beliefs like Christianity, where you can read in the Bible where it says, hey, slavery is legal, God says it's okay, then it makes sense why they're justifying slavery and why slavery was going on and what happened, and how a lot of free people was, converted to Christianity, free black folks, so they can, be in the know and be involved in whatever laws Britain was affording them for being a Christian. You got to think about it like that. You got to remember. So when we say this country wasn't founded on Christian values and everything, was Freemasons founded this country, yeah, but we're talking about the 1776 country. But it wasn't about masonry then. It was about, building, New Atlantis, which is a deeper thing to get into. But it was what it was. And it wasn't really going off of Freemason beliefs and everything like that. It was Christianity because that's what they was run by. And when you really dig into English common law, it's a lot of Christianity in it. So understand. I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch. Remember, pick up DEFCON Delta. Make sure you guys get stock market 1 and 2. The whole key to that whole thing is understanding those stocks. Part 3 is going to come out. Like I said, first 500 people will get part 3 free. And right now we have like 300 people who's going to get it free. So make sure you guys grab it. And we got into a lot of information in that, but you'll understand why certain things get ready to happen with the market, as you'll see. And I'll touch on that more. But again, thank you guys for watching. See you guys next video.